A Dark Place for Sheep by Knial R. Piper II. Chapter 4. I dismounted onto black dirt and walked Ridley far out of sight. I positioned him back between a disorganized row of bushes. As I tied him to one of those cursed trees, I gently petted the underside of his neck. I tried to assure him that he was in no danger, though we both knew otherwise. Therefore, I lightly gripped his mane and gave him a confirming look when our eyes connected. The big black orb stared straight into me. I lifted a finger to my mouth, instructing him to stay silent. Then, with the dust still on my palms, I headed off toward the cabin. I searched for a safe and comfortable place to lay down, a place with sufficient concealment. There was a small but thick and prickly bush within sight of the cabin. I removed my old brown bowler and set it at my side. I then burrowed my chest into the ground. I was able to peer through the stringy branches and thick thorns in order to see past a group of horses tied to the nearby trees. I had to carefully place my finger on an obstructing branch to pull it free from the others, so as to form a small peephole in the bush. From behind many tree trunks and dark foliage, I could see the structure more clearly. The small cabin was haphazardly built of twisted trees. The spaces between the poor construction had been filled in with the black clay of the earth. The nature of the materials caused the cabin to lean slightly forward over a small set of earthen steps where the travelers entered through an open door. Given my position to its flank, I could not see inside the door, but there was a small opening in the structure's side that worked as a poorly designed window. As I looked back on it now, everything about that moment made me utterly uncomfortable. If it would not have been for my then curious state of mind, there is little doubt that I would have turned around and left that place. Surely I would not have mistaken my excited instinct, yet there I was. I watched as the three men's shadows joined another group of shadows located inside the structure. All the silhouettes were brought to life by the light of several candles within the main room. The shadows that could be seen through the window moved toward the center of the room to form a single crowded shadow. As the group steadied, it also centered within my line of sight. I could see there were at least 15 to 20 of them in there. They were all dressed head to toe in black. I tried to make out further details, but they were all too far away for me to discern any distinguishing features. After a few minutes, they all stopped moving and ceased speaking. Every one of them stood still in the flickering candlelight. A new figure had entered the room from an opening in the back. It seemed there was a tiny room toward the rear of the cabin. The figure that came from there wore a large Stetson. It also appeared to be black as night. Or so that is what I could discern from my faraway place. Some of the other men had hats, but that man's was different. It felt darker. His presence felt darker. He made a movement that commanded the others' attention. Every eye in the house was on that person's slow pace toward the center of the room. He stopped directly behind the window's opening. The other men seemed to form a circle around him, and something else that sat beneath the window sill, something in the true center of the room. The leader found his place within the circle as the men all bowed their heads. Then, while they remained like that, yet another body entered from the back room. I felt nothing from that final figure, no darkness like the others. Unlike the others, he was dressed in a heavy, dark robe, or a black cloak of some kind. The men made an opening in their circle to allow the robed figure to pass into the center of the room, but even that man did not venture into the very middle. There was obviously something else that owned that prized spot. There was something around which they all gathered. The candles continued to flicker, and no matter how I tried, I could not make out any of the men's faces or distinguishing features. Yet I thought I might have seen the scar-faced man, given his height was taller than the others. Whether it was my mind playing tricks on me, I am not sure, but I thought I could see the large scar running down his face. I was almost sure it was the same stranger from before. The shadows formed a pattern of silhouettes, which appeared to hold hands or cross arms with one another. I squinted, trying to get a better look. I could not manage it, though. I searched around for a better position behind the bush, but it seemed none existed. Any move I made might easily be heard in the dead of night. Truth be told, I wouldn't have risked it either way. The cloaked man stood tall, raising his hands upward. His palms nearly touched the ceiling. For a moment, I thought I could hear whispers, like a repeated chant. But suddenly, everything became silent. I couldn't hear anything, not a damn thing, not even the rustling of creatures on dead leaves, not the wind blowing through the trees, not the restless steps of horses, not the breath of men. I swallowed my fear in that silence, but even my gulp ceased to sound. I kept focused on the scene playing out through the window. The cloaked man held his grand position as something strange happened. It appeared to me that the candlelight changed color. Something inside there seemed to burn like that of a heavy flaming geyser. It bore into the room a blinding blue hue. Within a single second, the silhouettes were no more. The entire cabin flooded forth with the brightness of that light, a light I had never seen. The cabin appeared as if it were exploding with the eerie blue luminescence. The darkness of the forest had been physically pierced by the tormented illumination. I can only imagine how wide my eyes were, despite the jarring bright light that suffocated them. They must have appeared as blue glass balls shimmering like ancient diamonds in the sockets of my skull. I could not turn away. Even when sound returned to my ears, I was fixated on the happening. Meanwhile, I heard heavy footsteps from within the cabin. It was the sound of something large walking upon the cabin floor. It carried no shadow in the light. It was something indistinguishable from the light, yet distinctively apart from it. Whatever it was inside the cabin with them. I could sense something tremendously terrible inside that cabin. I don't know how I knew it, but I had no doubt it was there. I had no doubt that it was evil. Then, an otherworldly yet unfamiliar sound confirmed it. I could hear it breathing. It was heavy, forceful, and raspy. The noise was not entirely loud, but hurt my head nonetheless. My mind ached under its steady and unsacred repetition. Then, mercifully, it seemed to hold its breath. I could no longer hear it. It had halted in place. Then there was a scream, a blood-curdling scream of a man snuffed from the night. I felt my skin tightening around my head as it tried to crawl away from my bones. The scream lasted long enough to stab my eardrums for many long seconds. I tried to lift myself with alarm, but the same fear kept me glued to the dirt. I felt as if I had become an immovable stone. There was yet another sound that followed the scream. It was a disorienting sound I can only describe as a stirring, or perhaps a gurgling. Then it ended. I could no longer sense that same evil present with us. The being ceased being. Suddenly, my petrification beneath a thorn bush was broken like the shattering of glass in an empty kitchen. My focus switched to a rustling noise coming from my rear. Ridley was forcing himself free from the tree amid the excitement. He was buckling and pulling like I had never seen him carry on before. He nearly yanked and uprooted the tree from the black forest dirt before his reins broke free, and so did Ridley. The leather string snapped, bringing with it another substantive sound. I reached a hand out, trying to calm him down and begging him to stay still. I wanted to shout at him, but I could not give my position away. I bit my bottom lip, pleading with God, but Ridley had decided he was done. He wanted out, and so he disappeared into the darkness. He moved as fast as he could, ducking and dodging every limb, branch, and root on his way out. He was gone. The damage was done. I hadn't the ability to hold back my foul language. I let a single curse word slip from under my breath. Immediately, I turned back toward the cabin in a cold sweat. Yet my sight had trouble adjusting to the returned darkness. The blue light was gone, and all was once again black. Even the candles were extinguished. My heart rate sprinted until it skipped beats. I could see very little ahead of me. Panic beset me. At first I couldn't hear any footsteps, so I continued to adjust my focus toward the danger in the cabin. I tried to hold my breath as I searched the window for signs of life. It took half a minute before my eyes were able to focus once more. As they adjusted to the absence of light, I could see clearly and without any doubt that the man in the black Stetson was forcing his fingers over the window's seal. His arms were locked and his head was aimed right at my buried body. He was looking directly at me. I felt it. I saw it. I knew it. I didn't need anyone to tell me otherwise. I was in trouble and reacted so. I sprung up from my spot there on my belly. Without grabbing my hat or checking my surroundings, I shot forth in a miracle mad dash, desiring to get far away from that strange cabin. Just like Ridley, I was sporting the forest. My adrenaline was bringing a vague sense of zen back into my being. I felt for a moment that it was just me, and me alone, running in that empty forest. But the feeling was broken when thoughts of ungodly creatures began nesting in my head. As I hurtled through thorny bushes and sharp tree limbs, my forearms and pant legs caught most of the brunt. Beyond that, there was many other times that my skin was opened by the forest shanks. I hadn't time to worry about my skin, my heart, or my breath. Everything just became fluid in that terror. That was around the same time I began to hear the men shuffling from the cabin to grab their horses. Even with such distance between us, I heard it all. The steps of men became the running of steeds. There was stomping at first, as the horses struggled through the forest's obstacles, but a few of the paces separated from the bunch and took to a beaten path on my right. They had found a cleared trail. Without the obstructions of the woods, those on the trail were gaining on me. I began to summon forth an idea of escape if I moved to my left, but I tripped and fell face first into the soft dirt. My head only narrowly missed a sharp rock that would have been the end of me. I winced in absolute pain as my body ached from the jolting slam. I rolled to my back to scream in agony, but I held the noise within me with a palm to my mouth. I looked to my left and then to my right. When I looked down at my feet, I saw an unfortunately placed root that had displaced my run. It had grown upward and back into the black earth like a sharp, ancient mountain. It existed all by itself, so perfectly as to do exactly what it did, put me down. Some of the horses raced past my position, only to stop abruptly. I heard the hooves sliding in the dirt, collecting soil as they did. They stopped moving as several others came up from behind me. Once the sound of horseshoes against dirt, roots, and rocks began again, the steps were much slower. They were controlled in place. I slid my hand down, trying to sink lower beneath the brush. I held a deep breath. The very act of subduing it made it that much more difficult to encapsulate. I had no choice but to listen intently as the men shuffled their horses about the forest around me. At that time, I could have only guessed that they used something greater than hand signals to communicate with one another, for a man would have needed perfect vision to even hit a target but 5 feet from his face in that sickening kind of darkness. Everything about that night, that whole day, perplexed me. It is only clear to me now how it all came to be. As I write herein, I am granted this grim hindsight. A number of horses moved around my position to form a circle with me at its center. One of them came close enough that I might have been able to reach out and touch the horse's leg. I dared not do such a thing. Instead, I laid in wait, afraid to look upward. I could only be thankful that those strangers hadn't continued onward to get Ridley. I prayed for an escape from that small ditch, a literal foxhole prayer. The rustling of horse steps continued until it became all too apparent to me that I was in an unforgiving danger. I was no longer hiding. I had been intentionally surrounded. I was encircled by the shadowy strangers upon their beasts. I felt every one of those men watching me. Even their horses' staring eyes rested upon me. However, I couldn't see a damn thing. Then I was blinded again by light. Blue light. The end of Chapter 4 of A Dark Place for Sheep by Knial R. Piper II.